Senator McDonald.
News this week the Labor government would ban live sheep exports sent a shiver up the spines of every grazier in Australia. And there is absolutely no doubt that banning sheep exports would open the door to banning live cattle exports, crippling the $2 billion live export industry and the 10,000 jobs it supports. Animal welfare is at the forefront of our live export trade. We've banned the shipment of sheep to the Middle East during the Northern Hemisphere summer, and the official mortality rate of sheep being transported is just 0.2% and dropping each year. In cattle, it's 0.1%. Research has already been conducted into using cameras on ships to enhance monitoring of animals on their journey. Animal health is the top consideration at every step of the supply chain, from the farm to feedlots to the ship. And participants in the live export trade are constantly scrutinised and face exclusion if they fail to meet the high standards set by industry. Another consideration ignored by activists is that of the 100 countries exporting live animals, Australia has the highest standards in the world. Not only that, we're the only country in the world that demands animal welfare standards from our customers. So we are holding our own people to high standards, and we are exporting these high standards around the world, training receiving countries to improve their own practices. And if Labor removes Australia from the world live export market, we are condemning animals in other countries to exceptionally poor outcomes. After Labor banned live exports in 2011, the backlash from the beef and sheep industries was immense, but that hasn't stopped the party from plotting to do it again. In fact, it was left up to animal activists to reveal Labor's plans shows the live export ban was being orchestrated to avoid scrutiny before the election. This policy by stealth is disgraceful and entirely in keeping with Labor's campaign strategy of "we have a plan, but we won't tell you the details until you vote for us." And also concerning is Labor has planned the demise of live exports without consulting with industry, relying instead on the emotion-charged, biased arguments by activists. Live export has enormous benefits for all of Australia, not just regional areas. Townsville Port is Australia's largest live export hub, supporting hundreds of jobs in Australia's unofficial northern capital. Live exports also go through Broome, Darwin and Fremantle. The northern cattle industry supports city-based transport companies and truck drivers. Graziers spend their incomes in cities, and the taxes they pay benefit us all. Primary production is hugely important for all of Australia. It's sustainable and it's in demand by scrupulous foreign customers, but Labor treats it like an afterthought, because without a strong ag sector, Australia will go backwards, and that will affect everyone, no matter where you live. For Australian graziers, life certainly won't be easy under Albanese. The live animal export trade is important not just to Australian graziers and farmers, though. It is terrifically important to our near neighbours. And the damage we did to our relationship with Indonesia with the overnight banning of that export market has damaged that relationship beyond repair. Over 10 years later, that is a country that still treats us with distrust, and it resulted in over $2 billion bill for this incoming government, both for damages at the time to graziers, transport operators and other businesses in the north, but as well as the growing interest bill that needs to be paid to those people. We saw poor animal welfare outcomes because of the overnight cancellation, and not to mention the massive mental health bill that was inflicted on all sorts of businesses and graziers and families in the north. It was just a horrific time, and for those people who attended those public forums, it was certainly devastating to see how those people had been affected. But live animal exports fills a portion of the market that is not just about exporting food, which is so incredibly important. Food security has been identified by the US Secretary of State at the recent UN World Peace Conference as being one of the most significant issues facing us in our time. Food security for Australians and for our near neighbours is of critical importance. And the part that we have to understand about live animal exports is that it is not just about receiving the best quality food that we grow here in Australia. It is also about being cognisant of religious requirements in those countries. This is something that we don't have to understand here, but in those countries, to receive live animals suitable for their markets, to be eaten in an appropriate, killed and eaten in an appropriate way, is significant for them. And that is a part of the exports that we consider when we have a live animal trade. It is not just about food, it is about cultural and religious beliefs, and in parts of the world it's also about their economic conditions, where they don't have the electricity and the reliable power to enable to have the refrigeration and the cold store chains that we enjoy in this country. So when Australia exports live animals to other countries, there is a number of issues that we are complementing our near neighbours and our trade partners. It is an important relationship that we understand culturally their challenges, economically their challenges, and of course, and most importantly, their food requirements. Because there is nothing more important in the world than growing and providing food and fibre. That is the human condition. Everything else that we do adds to the quality of life that we have. But without food, we don't survive. So I'm very proud of the work that particularly the sheep industry of Western Australia does, the cattle industry of Northern Australia, because they've developed relationships that are beyond just that simple provision of food to suit the human condition. They are relationships and friendships that have now developed over generations as we've done that. And it's important. It's important, particularly in this uncertain geopolitical time that we live in, that we have strong relationships with our near neighbours. And that's why it was so distressing to see during the close of the last government, when we were negotiating the ag visas, so important to agricultural businesses right across this country, whether it be in horticulture or animal production, piggeries, feedlots, the sort of workforce who was skilled in these expertises from Indonesia, from the Philippines, from other near neighbours, was damaged. And it wasn't actually damaged by activists, it was damaged by the AWU, the Australian Workers' Union, who went and lobbied with those embassies and said, Australian farmers will exploit your people. What an outrageous thing to do, so un-Australian, because it showed such a lack of understanding of the requirements during the post-COVID environment, where workforce shortage has been so difficult that farmers have had to leave crops rot on the ground or in trees, not planted as much food as they possibly could because they didn't feel confident in being able to harvest that at the end of the year. But instead, some poor behaviour from some contractors meant that the AWU was calling Australian farmers exploiters and saying it was part of business as usual for them. It is shameful. It is shameful. And it has shaken me to the core to understand that people who advocate for Australians, for Australian businesses and Australian workers could so willfully undermine our industry, our own people, and not just our people, but the people who do the important work of growing food and fibre, not just Australians but our near neighbours, how shocking that is. And to hear Labor continue these outrageous claims that the ag visa didn't get up because of any reason apart from their own henchmen going around and lobbying and bullying embassies and calling our farmers exploiters. It was truly a very dark day in Australia's history and certainly in the agricultural history. So I support the work of Australian farmers as they export not only food and fibre to our near neighbours, they understand and are sympathetic to the cultural differences of our near neighbours. and they understand the economic environment where there may not be good cold store chains for the people that we're supplying food to. Because there's a whole lot of businesses that also spring up around live animal exports once the animals arrive in those countries, where farmers might only take 2 or 3 head to take off to fatten in their own mini feedlots. These are important parts of the industry and commerce of those towns. And then, of course, Australia does the most important thing of all, which is that we export our very, very high animal welfare standards. Our closed supply chain in those countries mean that we demand the same export standards in our receiving countries as we demand in our own countries, whether it be in the way that animals are cared for, whether it be in the process of slaughter. We demand that they stand up to the same rigorous requirements that we have here in this country. And for anybody to suggest that that's not the case just flies in the face of the science and the research that has been handled, both by the Department of Agriculture, by industry groups, and the fact that we had whistleblowers being paid for their photos, being paid for their evidence, is just extraordinary. Because if that was in any other situation, you discovered that the person giving evidence was being paid to provide evidence, then you would call into question the whole credibility of that complaint. That's exactly what we've relied on in this case, is somebody who we don't know if they're actually intentionally trying to hurt those animals, trying to make them distressed in order to provide footage for activists' intentions to shut down the very important work that Australian farmers and Australian exporters do in providing food security to these countries and allowing them to eat in a way that is culturally appropriate and in a way that suits their lack of cold store supply chains. And so I oppose this particular requirement because of this motion, because I know that Australian farmers and Australian exporters do hold to the very highest standards. We should feel proud of them. And in fact, I would welcome any of these activists, any of the members opposite, to go and visit a live export ship, to go and visit with the farmers and graziers who take their stock there, to travel on the ship and to see just how excellent and expert these ships are, the staff are, the inspectors are. And the advent now, where they've been trialling having remote cameras on ships, I think is an extraordinary development, because it shows how transparent the industry can be. Right around the world, we've just lived through a period of remote everything, remote schooling, remote meetings, remote leisure activities, and now we can even remotely watch stock as they travel across the seas to our trade partners, and we can be assured ourselves of just the high standards that they're being looked after in. So, you know, I just can't believe that with all the work that is done in this regard, with the Inspector General for live exports, with the independent observers, and of course with those very, very important trade relations with our near neighbours in this time where food security is the number one issue that is affecting countries. We know that when people feel insecure, when food supply is threatened, it is the most dangerous thing that we can do to our trade relationships. We saw it in Indonesia. We saw it with that trade relationship that has barely recovered. And I fear for the outcomes that would happen if we were to close down this very appropriate live export industry with sheep, this very high standard of export, the very tight restrictions that we have on weight and standards. And anybody who thinks we're killing the sheep has never been on a ship, has never been to see the standards, who are so poorly informed that they should hang their heads in shame at their criticisms of the standards that we uphold, and I can only ask them, please go on a ship, go out and see what actually happens, stop listening to poorly informed activists. Thank you.